Wil jij starten met het verkopen van producten online, maar heb je geen idee waar je moet beginnen? Dan heb ik misschien iets leuks voor.
ultimately, this is all you need. Be your everything, yeah, I'll be your everything. Still too soon to feel, please just say it's real.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's guest lecture with KIC International. Our guests this evening are from SCDAI, which is a student centre for diversity, advocacy and inclusion, and they are based here in Groningen. For all students, we believe it is essential to learn more about the topic of diversity and inclusion and how to implement this within our daily lives and workspace. If you guys have any questions throughout this guest lecture, just put them in the chat and we will address them when we can. And on that note, I will hand over the discussion to Alex and Genesis.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex and this is Genesis, and we're super happy to have you with us tonight. First, I'm going to lead you through what we're going to be talking about so you have a little bit of an impression of what's the vibe for tonight, but basically first we're going to introduce you to who we really are, so tell you a little bit more about ourselves and SCDAI specifically. Then we are going to go into some core concepts such as diversity, inclusion, equality, equity, recognizing biases, identifying barriers, making differences between the concepts of diversity and tokenism, for example, and being an ally at the workplace. That's of course important because a lot of us are going to go into the professional field, so it's important to understand these. So that's the general layout for tonight. So we're very excited to be going through these. And let's first start off with who we are. As I said, I'm Alex and this is Genesis. I'm from Bulgaria, but I guess it's more important for you to know who we are as SCDAI. I'll give you a little bit of our background and how SCDAI was created. Both of us and the rest of our team are from the program International Communication at the Hanze, and we, in our second year, we encountered several racist and discriminatory accidents that occurred in class, and we were very saddened by this, and we thought, well, we want to do something about it. We want to raise awareness, and we thought that this could help ourselves, but also our peers and our teachers to learn more about diversity and diverse social issues. So we started the Student Center for Diversity Awareness and Inclusion, where you might see that that is a little bit different from what the name that we go by right now. And that happened all when we were on our third year. In our third year, we were abroad, so we were not really in Groningen in the Netherlands in that period, where, as you may remember, there was big BLM protests around the world, and we thought that our institution that we were students at needed to do more, so we started a petition to demand for systemic reform and to really make a bigger difference. So that's why we shifted from simply raising awareness towards advocacy, because we believe that apart from raising awareness, we need to change the way our systems work in order to create these more inclusive spaces for everyone. And we mostly function within the domain of higher education, but that is often similar to other domains, the professional workspace, for example, which is, of course, what we're partially touching upon tonight. And yeah, our platform is a platform for students, and it is by students because we all are students, our whole team is. But I'll have Genesis explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Genesis, as Alex mentioned, and I'll tell you a little bit about who SCDAI is, because as we mentioned, we are a platform maintained by students for students, or one of our main goals is to create this platform where students can come together and raise awareness and advocate for issues that they are passionate about. So we would like to invite you to hit us up anytime that you would like to take part of our platform and make use of our platform to raise awareness of something important to you. but also just to share your creativity. We have something called, for instance, Creative Mondays, where we post something creative that you made. At the moment, we're making it ourselves, and we can add a text that is important to you and that is relevant to you and something you want to raise awareness towards. But aside from that, we also have a podcast. We have a website launching soon where you can read blogs, write blogs. You can facilitate a vlog. We recently had our first student takeover in our vlogs where we talked about feminism, so you should check that out. We also share resources on our Instagram page, but also on our website soon. So you can help us collect any of that and share anything that is important to you. And for the rest, well, we do lectures and workshops like this one. And we're always willing to learn more and to really, I guess, learn from you and give you that platform to learn. Our team, as much as we try to be inclusive, we need to be aware that we can't represent every single group that is underrepresented, and we find it very important to have that representation. So if you can bring that in, please feel welcome to. Yeah, and moving on to what is inclusion? So as we mentioned today, we're going to really be talking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And I'm going to start off by explaining what inclusion is. It sounds a little bit redundant, but the simplest way to explain inclusion is that it's the absence of exclusion. So exclusion, as you can read, is a process through which individuals or groups are wholly or partially excluded from fully participating in all aspects of life or the society, in which they live on the grounds of their social identities such as age, gender, race, ethnicities, religion, cultural or language, and or physical, economic, social disadvantages. Now it's a mouthful. So in short, inclusion is when individuals or groups are not excluded from fully participating in society. The importance of this is that, while it sounds like a very simple concept, what we need to understand is that our society is molded for exclusion. So what do we mean by this? On the left, you can see what equality is like. This is our current society. It is a society that is filled with different barriers. And this is what equality looks like. This is what happens when we treat everyone the same in a society that is molded to benefit others more than others. Then we move on to equity, which is unfortunately the best approach for our current society. In our current environment, this is the best approach, where we try to include the necessities and the needs of people to kind of find a workaround for the barriers to inclusion. But ideally, we want to reach inclusion, which is when we are able to remove all of those barriers and really include everyone. Now, it sounds very easy, like let's just remove those barriers, but we need to keep in mind that when we look at the first image of what our society looks like, this person that is able to look at the game in this metaphor used here, this person holds a lot of power. This person can make informed decisions. Now, let's say he would like to place a bet on the game. He can make an informed decision while everyone else would just have to guess what the score is and make their bet according to that and just hope that they get lucky. But he can also make financial gain off of this. He can be like, I'll tell you the score if you give me some money. And he controls the narrative of the game. I mean, the game could be the blue team has 2 points and the red one has 4, but he can switch it around because he can control that narrative. So in the same way, that's how our society functions. Those that are not hampered by these barriers hold a lot of power. This includes individuals, institutions, and societal systems that have this power. So they will oppose removing these barriers because it's just not beneficial to them. An example we can use is menstrual products. Now, people who menstruate need menstrual products to be able to undergo their menstruation with dignity and hygienically. But this represents a barrier because it's not always that you have access to them. Our periods are unexpected, and sometimes we can get them in moments that we don't expect them to. And there are a lot of systems that profit off of that. Capitalism, when we look at the industry of menstrual products, that's a huge industry that wouldn't profit from removing that barrier in the sense of, let's make menstrual products free. So presenting it, we should just remove these barriers to inclusion can sound very easy, But we need to keep in mind that there's so many systems that would, I guess, be at a disadvantage if we remove all these systems, all these barriers. But it also points out the importance of talking about inclusion not only individually, but also in institutions and in systems, which is why I guess we're here today to really talk about why it is important to bring up diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So moving on, how to be inclusive in the workplace. Now there are a lot of ways, but we want to point out some. And first, I think it starts with recognizing your own biases. The first step in becoming truly inclusive is recognizing what those biases are that you have within yourself. So before you can start really making that external change, we need to make it internally. And there are multiple ways where you can do that, but we want to give you some tips for right now. And the first one is identifying patterns in your thoughts and behaviors. Now these are predominantly the thoughts and behaviors that happen subconsciously, that just happen automatically. An example of this is, let's say you are a man and you often find yourself explaining concepts and terms to women that they didn't ask you to explain to them. Now it's important that while you might not recognize that you do this, that this is a pattern in your behavior, that when it is pointed out to you, that you reflect on where does that come from. Do you internally assume that as a man, you have a higher intellectual capacity than a woman? Do you maybe assume that women expect men to save them and to explain concepts to them? And question that, really challenge those thoughts and those beliefs until you can rewire those patterns in your behavior and in your thoughts. Another thing you can do is engage in conversations with people from your own social groups. Now this is crucial both for groups that are underrepresented and groups that have the privilege of not being. An example that we can give is, for instance, in the Netherlands, there is, for birthday parties, there's a tradition to sing a very racist song against people with an Asian background. It's called Hanky Panky Shanghai. I think that's how to pronounce it. And it's basically a mockery of Asian culture, a generalization of it all, and then they kind of put their fingers together and they pull their eyes back and start singing the song that is very offensive. And no one really questions it because it falls under this umbrella of tradition, culture, until you're confronted with it. And it is in these moments that it's imperative that you talk to people from your own social group. You might not be doing it with a negative intent or with the intention to hurt someone or to stereotype, but you are. So talk about it. Even if there aren't any Asians in the room, talk about it. Why do we do this? Why do we have this tradition? Can't we just sing happy birthday and move on with our day? But also underrepresented groups. A couple of years ago, I shaved my head and started growing my hair naturally because as a Afro-Latina woman, it was tradition that we would relax our hair to make it straight. So it's like you put a lot of chemicals in your hair so that it's straight. And so it was just always something that I did and never something that I questioned. And it wasn't until I moved here where I no longer had access to this because it's a process to put these chemicals, and not just anyone can do it. Also, why would Dutch women with already straight hair know how to make curly hair straight? And it wasn't until I started having these conversations with people in my own group that I realized that it was just this big prejudice against myself and the rejection of my blackness, of being like, I can't have this big curly hair afro. I needed to be straight. And confronting that really helped me tackle my own biases against my own ethnic group. Another thing that you can do is understand the root of your thoughts and behavior. An example of this is when it comes to the English language. We often experience that people assume that when people speak English with an accent or a little broken English, that these people are automatically less intelligent than those that speak English natively or fluently. And it's important to question yourself. What is the root of that? Ask yourself, why? Why do I assume that the English language is the ultimate sign of intelligence? What are the qualities of my colleague that I am ignoring because I'm prejudicial against the way that they speak English? So really understanding where those thoughts and those behaviors come from help us really confront them and challenge them and work towards solving them. And lastly, the last tip that we're going to give you for today in regards to how to be more inclusive in the workplace is to stop generalizing. As humans, I think it is our innate nature to really to try to simplify things. And one of the easiest things in the world is to generalize. You know, if you met one person from one group and you just assume that every way that that person is applies to every person from that group, it's super easy. You will never have to bother getting to know anyone else. But that's unfortunately not how people are. People are set up. So it's important to not generalize. I think, for instance, as a Black woman, I have certain opinions of certain things that I prefer you do and others that you don't. A lot of the times people are like, oh yeah, but my other Black friend lets me touch her hair, and well, I don't like it. and it's important to understand that I'm not a monolith, that I don't speak on behalf of all Blacks, I speak on behalf of myself, and that it might be uncomfortable and it might represent a lot of extra work for you, but it is how societies function. And this way you avoid generalizing people and putting them in boxes that they don't fit in. So those are a couple of tips on how you can work on being more inclusive in the workplace. So recognizing your barriers, it really starts from within before you can start working on the outside. So moving on, as you can remember from when we were talking about the field and the barriers. Now, what are these barriers? What are these barriers that prevent people from seeing the game or participating in society? So we have different barriers, and we're going to start with environmental. Now, environmental refers to everything in your natural built environment that can represent a barrier for certain groups. An example of this is, for instance, is your building accessible for someone in a wheelchair? So if it's not, if you only have stairs, for instance, and you don't have an elevator that this person can use, then in your environment, there is a barrier that prevents someone from fully participating in the society. So let's say you have a classmate that would like to go to a lecture, but can't because they physically cannot access the room where the lecture is being held. In the same way, this applies to our work lives. Even if there is a workaround, but that requires a lot more effort than it would someone who doesn't have a walking disability, that is already a barrier. Taking a different step, even though you can eventually get there, taking steps that require a lot more effort are also a barrier, so that's important to recognize. But also something like, are there sufficient and well-equipped toilets for people who menstruate? If I get my period unexpectedly at school and there is no way for me to find a tampon or a pad, I have to go home, and that is a barrier for me. Because someone who doesn't menstruate, which is predominantly men, would not have to make that choice of, do I stay at school and I stain my clothes and possibly where I'm sitting, and I feel just this discomfort, or do I go home and miss out on whatever it is I need to do? The same place that applies as well in the workplace. Another barrier is attitudinal. Now, this refers to your attitude towards certain individuals as a result of your biases. So the biases that we identified before, they result in actions, in behaviors, in certain attitudes. And this attitude that you have can represent barriers for others. For instance, gaslighting. One of the most common barriers for underrepresented groups is that their experiences are continuously gaslit. Like, with this, we refer to silencing people and continuously questioning their experiences. So examples of this can be, you might not actually be gay, just confused, or maybe they were just joking, or there is no racism in the Netherlands. Things like that are ways that you gaslight people and represent barriers in them advocating for their own inclusion. Next to that, we have individual. This might be a little confusing with what we said about not being monolith. So this kind of follows up on that. Individual barriers refer to an individual's barriers to inclusion. We must always remember that people are not the same and that they process things differently. So for instance, let's say Alex is very comfortable speaking out whenever she feels excluded and discriminated. Let's say she says, you know, I don't think it's okay that I'm continuously spoken over as a woman in this meeting. But I might be a little bit more shy or a little bit more timid to point that out. And that represents an individual barrier for me, because I won't be able to speak up for myself, or I won't be able to advocate for my own inclusion. So those are individual barriers that we need to keep in mind. So how does this apply in our workplace? I think keep it in mind. I think just continuously, hey, we haven't allowed X person to say something throughout this meeting. Maybe we should give some space for them to do so. And lastly, we have institutional barriers, which refers to barriers embedded in institutions through tradition, policies, and even legislation. So an example of this can be, for instance, let's say we always have a traditional office Christmas party. Maybe we should consider having a holiday party to be mindful of the other religious or non-religious festivities happening at this time. But this is also embedded in our legislation. So for instance, while in the Netherlands, like in many other places, most legally recognized holidays are Christian. I mean, we're in the month of May. How many days off have we had that are Christian holidays? So what that would mean is, let's say during the month of December, going back to our Christmas example, as a Jew, you would like to take some time off to celebrate the first day or the couple of days of Hanukkah, you won't be able to do so just like that. You will have to either ask for the exemption and depend on whether your boss would like to do that, to give you those days off out of their own desire to facilitate it for you, or you would even need to take the time off of your vacation days. And that represents a barrier for you. Because while a Christian can celebrate Christmas without it being removed from their vacation days, a Jew or someone celebrating Ramadan, like just passed, would need to take that time off of their vacation days. So those are the barriers that are represented within our institution. So why is it important for you to understand what these barriers are? Because, well, there's just so many dimensions into barriers and what prevents us from fully participating in society. And if you understand them and understand the layers of them, you're better equipped to tackle them. These are, of course, not all of the ways that we can be inclusive in the workplace, but we hope that by recognizing your own biases and identifying the barriers that could be in place for underrepresented groups, you're better able to recognize or to advocate for inclusion. Now, before we move on to diversity and talking about what that is and how to be an ally, we would like to have some questions, and so that they don't all pile up for the end.
Yeah.
We currently have no questions, but if anybody has any questions about what Genesis just talked about, feel free to put them in now, because we can answer them, as I said, and they won't pile up. So maybe we'll give a minute or two for people to think.
Otherwise you can also just keep it for the end if you would prefer that. But if you have something now that you would like to get out of the way, please do it. Keep in mind that we still have a little bit to cover, but if you want to shoot a question now, do so.
Yeah, maybe we should just move on then.
Yeah,
all right.
We'll move on. And if you have any questions, we'll hear them at the end.
Yeah. All right, yeah. Just also, you can, while you're hearing us talk, you can as well just keep, start sending them in there. And we might not answer them immediately, but you can just go ahead and send them in there if something comes to mind immediately. But I'm going to go ahead and start then. So on this slide, you can see several visualizations that I'm going to explain. So they might be confusing a little bit now, but we'll get there. So we're talking about diversity now. And diversity is a term or a word that's thrown around very, very frequently, especially in the last year. I mean, as well as inclusion. So it's really important when we use these words and we use this language, or we hear it in our workplace or in our institution or higher education institution, it's super important to really understand what it means. And we're going to give you kind of a breakdown of that. Okay, so we have the way usually diversity is presented is more like, oh, you have someone who's black, you have someone who's white, you have someone who's Christian, a Jew, and then that's diversity. Unfortunately, that is rather variety. So just having a bunch of different people from different ethnicities, religions, places in the world, and so on and so forth, doesn't make the group diverse. It doesn't make it doesn't make your workplace diverse or your higher education. It makes it variable, let's say. So therefore, in the first, I guess on the left of the slide, you can see that is rather a discriminated variety, let's call it, because then you have a bunch of people from different social identities, but there's no really mechanisms that help mend gaps or prevent from exclusive practices or barriers to happen. And I guess I'm going to give an example of my own. Is in my first year, as I said, I study international communication. And in my first year, we were a group of people from very different social identities, and of course, like nationalities. That's very common in international communication, at least. And something that happened quite frequently, I'm a very very proactive student, and I am very active in projects and in any really school-related work, and also in the classroom. And so what would happen is that because I am like this, and I had also one more person from Eastern Europe as well, because I am the way I am, a lot of times one of our teachers would say, "Oh, you're almost like a German girl," which at first, I didn't think much of it, but it really shows the expectation of the perfect student to be German. And that makes a lot of people, and myself included, have to overcompensate, be like, okay, you're almost like a German girl, but you're not really. So in this case, of course, it's just an example, but you have people from different places, different walks of life, but there's no really functional diversity. It's just a variety of people. And then the middle visualization that you see, and you can read tokenism, that is kind of tokenism refers to making a performative action of seeming diverse, let's say. That's a tokenized variety, rather. And a good example of that, and you might have encountered this yourself, but let's say there's marketing materials for this company or this university that you're applying to. And in it, you see a group of diverse people, right? You have someone who's Black, someone who's Asian, someone who's Muslim, for example. And that gives you the impression that it is a place that collects a lot of different cultures, which is great, and that's what we should strive for. But then you go there, you are, let's say, hired or accepted as a student, and you go there and you realize, well, it's mostly white, we're in the Netherlands, so mostly Dutch, and it's a little bit different from what you expected based on the perception that the institution or establishment has created for you. And a lot of times these are performative actions to kind of check the boxes of, oh, we are diverse and inclusive. And that is not necessary, and it doesn't work for underrepresented groups, whether it is at the workplace or in your higher education institution. And then we have the final image / visualization on the right. That is ideally diversity, and that refers to really making the difference between the first image and the last one is inclusion, having those barriers removed, enabling and empowering people to fully participate in everything, whether that is student life, education, or practicing their job and feeling happy with it. And when I say happy, in this case, we measure it by the ability to participate, not how much you like what you do. And yeah, that's just kind of explaining diversity, because as I said, we see that term thrown around a lot, but whether it truly lives up to what it aspires to is the question. Yeah, and I guess the next topic we should cover is really allyship at the workplace, and how you as an individual can help people who are from more underrepresented groups, or at the workplace, or even in the classroom, because we're still students, right, feel more accommodated, even if their needs are not met by the institution or establishment. So we have a few points that help with that. This is not a formula, unfortunately, but we think that these are ways that you can these are the steps that you could take, basically. So anyways, the first points that you could see is understanding your own privilege. And I think this is also something that probably a lot of us see a lot on social media: white privilege, male privilege, and let's break it down a little bit. So it is in the end based on your social identity and the position you hold in society, as we saw in the visualization of that game, where only one person really was seeing and in control of the narrative of the game. So that is you should evaluate what is the position that you hold, because based on that you know what you can do for someone who doesn't hold that position. And it is important to understand that you don't have to be a white male to hold privilege. You can be from any social group really and hold certain forms of privilege. Like I myself, yes, I'm for example a woman, and I am Jewish, and I'm Eastern European, and these are things that a lot of times in society I might be discriminated upon, but I am, for example, still white, so I would never be discriminated on the basis of my skin color. And that is something that each of us, that's when we say understand the privilege, even if you are from a more oppressed or underrepresented group, you still can hold privilege. So that's a layered concept. And yeah, it's again really doing the internal work and seeing what kind of biases do you hold, and what is the privilege that you hold. Number two is a little bit self-explanatory, I guess. It's see something, say something. It is very important to make sure that you are conscious of your environment and of what's happening. So this is probably at the point where you are actively examining your own biases, because if you're not doing that, you probably won't see something in order to say something. So yeah, if you see something going on and you register, well, this is not okay, maybe you don't know why exactly, then make sure that you can pinpoint these moments and speak up if you're able to, of course. And point number three is very much connected to point number two, the see something, say something. A lot of times when I guess we discover injustice or discrimination or the concept of racism and all of that, you may feel like the need to, I want to change this whole world and everything and how it works. And however, in doing that, there's already been people who for a very long time have been on the receiving end of discrimination and racism. And they are likely trying to speak up, but because of the way racism and discrimination functions, are not able to. So if you are in that privileged position where you can pass the mic, basically, instead of necessarily always saying something, that is the ideal situation. Really holding space for other people to address their own needs and advocate for themselves, if that's possible, of course. So that's very important. While you should say something if you see something, still hold space for others to be able to do the same. Number four, that is being open to criticism and being corrected. I think everyone should really always stay open to that when it comes to these kinds of topics. I mean, us ourselves, I think, just because we're here and talking to you about these things, it really doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't be corrected. Definitely we should, and I think that's the most valuable thing about continuously examining your own biases and really internalizing the fight against discrimination and racism is also, it's very important. We're not perfect, and like probably after this lecture there's going to be some things that we're going to see, and we're going to also criticize ourselves and also tell us, like, is there something that we're saying that is maybe not exactly on point. It's very important to do that, regardless of whether you're a proclaimed activist or not. Point number five, address institutionalized discrimination through influencing policy and advocacy. This one, of course, is a little bit more complicated and it requires more effort. But well, I'll give you a little example to kind of understand. It is also about being always vigilant and conscious of the environment that you are in order to be able to affect some kind of change. So something that we, at least as international communication students, we study, but probably in the general field of communication and business, this is something that is commonly studied, is CSR, so corporate social responsibility in short, and this is something that we actively put emphasis on and we learn about, and how to spot greenwashing and how to remain ethical through business practices or marketing practices. And that is great, that is very important, but it's something that is very often neglected, is that ethical practices do include diversity and inclusion and equity and all of these concepts that we've been talking about, but they rarely find place in our education when being prepared for the professional field, really. So while it will take a long process to enhance and enrich a curriculum, or even if you're not a student but just already working, maybe you're an entrepreneur, these are things that CSR should not just be limited to simply the environment, which is very important, but also when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And if you are able to really dive that deep and see these things and patterns, you are likely able to affect change, again, depending on your position in a company, or your depending on your privileged position as well. So it's just very important to always stay vigilant of your environment and see if you can make a change. And finally, number 6, it's not a destination, it's a journey. As much as we want a band-aid or like a quick fix, it's not, unfortunately, it's not that simple. And it's a continuous effort. If you're in decision-making positions, it requires a lot of practical and resource investment, but if you're not, it requires continuous internal effort as well. So I guess embrace it, and to do that, you really need to be open to the criticism. And that is it for. I hope I didn't miss anything, but that was our final point from the things that we wanted to tell you. But we're now again open for questions. I don't know if any came in, but at this point you can shoot your questions really.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. We do have a few questions. So I'll start with the first one. So it's, how could you handle a situation where a colleague is being insensitive or inappropriate? How could you approach them on that?
All right. Well, that's a good question. I think it depends a lot on the situation and which position you're in, which is why it's so important to recognize not only your own biases, but also the privileged position that you hold. And then you can make that informed decision. A lot of the times, it might be physically unsafe or uncomfortable for you to confront that situation. But if you're not, if you evaluate yourself and you're like, I am in a position of privilege to handle this conversation without being personally attacked. An example of which is the racist incident that got SCDAI together was when a classmate made a racist comment, and people that weren't from the group that he was specifically talking about came up and talked about it and addressed it because they were in a position of privilege to not feel personally attacked by it. So it's not something that we can really say, hey, this is the situation, this is exactly what you can do at the moment. You really need to evaluate the environment, but this is also why it's important for institutions to really invest in policies about diversity and inclusion. For instance, sexual harassment. That's something that's so uncomfortable and physically dangerous to address in the moment if you're feeling sexually harassed by a colleague, which is why it's important to have policies in place that you know of a confidential person or a confidential HR employee that you can approach and be like, this is happening, and that they have systems in place on how to handle this in a way that protects your safety and your emotional well-being as well.
And I was also thinking that I think it's very important to also like talk to the person who you know is being discriminated in that point, and maybe you personally are feeling, what do I do? But the most important thing is that this other person who you assume is probably feeling very uncomfortable at this point, you reach out to them, because I think it's very important for the other people to know like they have someone who also recognizes these situations. And for starters, at least having like a shoulder, not a shoulder to cry on, but like an ally, you know? Like,
literally an ally.
So, so having really someone there who you know is also like aware of these kinds of situations, that is, I think, feasibly the most attainable thing. And because the conversations with management or superiors are something that is difficult, especially if it's the first time that's happening. So I think really reaching out to that person who's probably affected in that situation is the most important thing to do first.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, it's finding that balance of what can you do for that person in the moment, but also, you know, not neglecting the issue at hand and addressing it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you, guys. The next question is, did you ever experience a situation where you were not being included or where you felt like you did not belong?
Thanks for looking at me. Well, I mean, I'm a black woman in the Netherlands, in Groningen, so it does happen. And I think one of the most uncomfortable thing is often feeling like you're not entitled to feeling that way, you know, where you think, maybe I'm just exaggerating it in my head or blowing it out of proportion, or maybe they didn't mean that in that way. And I think the way that I have managed to find support in that is through people that I don't need to explain myself, where I can just be like, I felt very uncomfortable with that, and they can listen to me and I guess work actively to help me navigate through those moments where I feel like I stand out. Yeah. But I mean, I also have like a very physical way to tell that, you know, there's something different about me here. So so I think it's a lot more evident and in your face, while sometimes it's a lot more latent. That's also something that, you know, we have to process in this new era, is that racism and discrimination happens a lot more subtly than it used to. You know, someone will not in your face tell you, you know, hey, I don't like you for XX reason. Like the example.
But I think a lot of times they don't even realize that's the thing. It's a lot of times it's trying to justify why someone said something because they really didn't mean it that way, but they don't understand that there's fundamental gaps and why this prejudice came about. Yeah. So it's a lot of times it's really about understanding that, like, not trying to justify yourself, but if someone especially like tells you, hey, this makes me feel uncomfortable, or you realize that this is a weird and controversial situation, don't add, like, what's it called, like, salt to the wound. It's what we say in Bulgaria.
Yeah, it makes sense. I say it as well.
But try to trying to really understand that it's, even if you didn't mean it that way, it first of all came across that way, and second of all, there's probably something that you didn't intend. Okay, so you didn't intend to hurt someone. Maybe that's the case. You didn't intend to hurt them or offend them or be racist. But you need to understand that even if that wasn't your intention, that is the outcome. So what can you do about that, basically? What can you learn from that? So not being on the defensive about these situations all the time, but soaking into your discomfort.
Yeah, and accepting criticism, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. Okay, and then the next question, do you think that students' personal problems reflect their interactions with other students?
Wait, I don't understand this question exactly.
I think maybe, I can repeat it. So, do you think that students' personal problems reflect their interaction with other students? So maybe
their experiences with exclusion?
Yeah.
Well, definitely. I think it definitely affects the way that we interact with people. I come from Bonaire, so that is a predominantly black island. So coming here was the first time that I was a minority, a racial minority, and it's never something that I had to really experience or learn to navigate. And then I came here, and it was a big shock. It was something that I suddenly needed to learn to navigate, and I noticed myself becoming more skeptical of people. I was like, it became kind of like, you're a racist until you prove otherwise, which might not be the ideal way to interact with people, but it was kind of my own protection mechanism. How was that for you, Alex?
I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what they meant, but like in my case, I know that a lot from back home. I'm also Jewish. I don't know if
You mentioned it.
I don't know if I mentioned it.
You did.
I'm mentioning it again. And back home, I would never tell anyone that I just met that I'm Jewish, because I don't know if I'm going to be safe in that situation. And it's not the same in the Netherlands, definitely. But I kind of have the same thing, like until, I mean, and I guess I'm more privileged in that sense, because nobody can know, how are they going to know that I'm Jewish, like, unless I tell them. That's why I always consciously always think like, I don't know where they are, so I'm not going to mention it until I'm sure that it's not going to be an issue, which is a sad approach, but
yeah, a protection mechanism.
Yeah, okay. The next question, do you also, or did you already help some companies to share awareness about diversity and inclusion?
So like worked with companies?
Yeah, exactly. Did you? Yeah,
Well, the Hansa, really. We haven't expanded as much beyond the Hansa, really.
Yeah.
Well, we aim specifically for higher education. So it's a platform by students for students. So that is definitely our niche group. We definitely think that there are other organizations that kind of influence how a student feels aside from just their academic institution. But that's mostly where we focus on, and we try to I guess get the conversation started with Hansa, because that is our environment and where we are based.
Yeah, we try to. I mean, we do that kind of in our free time. So we wish, of course, we could affect more domains, but for right now, we are focused on higher education, and obviously the closest reach for that is Hansa. And since that petition that I mentioned in the beginning, we've tried to work kind of, I would say, behind the scenes, because we don't necessarily put that on social media and stuff like that, because it's more of we're trying to affect the change internally. So hopefully you will feel it instead of like seeing it. So we've been trying to like reach out to different parties within the university. We've had some meetings, and the conversation is going. I mean, obviously there's no apparent solutions yet, because as we said, it's a journey.
Yeah, but it's also important to keep in mind what we mentioned in the beginning, that there are a lot of individuals and institutions that profit off of these barriers being there. It's always been the norm, and it requires a lot of effort, tremendous effort, and a lot of convincing different people to remove these barriers. So it's always going to be a process. It's unfortunately not something that we can do right there, and it's something that we also unfortunately learned as we go, that it's a process, and that you just have to fight so many institutions, so many systems, so many individuals, so many barriers to get the ball rolling. But hopefully we're transitioning into a society that is less tolerant for it.
Yeah, and just on that topic, because obviously Hansa is the first institution that you've worked with, but overall, has it been a positive experience, or was it quite difficult to get that conversation going?
I think we need to bring it back to what we were talking about, when we were just making that distinction between discrimination, tokenism, and inclusion. It's a lot easier to be tokenistic. It's a lot easier to want, I guess, the easy solution, and that's not always intentional. Sometimes we are tokenistic unintentionally because we just don't have enough people in decision-making positions that are aware of this. So I think that's for us the biggest issue that we've encountered, is presenting the urgency of this issue and the magnitude of it, that it's not something that we can solve by taking some pictures with people from more diverse backgrounds. It's something that we really need. It needs to be deeper in our institution.
Yeah, I think I mean it depends. Like I would say like it a lot of times negatively impacts our mental health, because we do that out of our own time, and there's a lot of effort involved that we don't really get anything in return for it. So essentially, it is that can have negative effects on our mental health as the SCDAI group, I would say.
Yeah.
But I do, and I guess to put it into context, you talk to a lot of different people, and this specifically, but also all other institutions that are that big, are bureaucratic institutions that require a lot of paperwork and a lot of and there's
climbing
a lot
the
of
ladder,
and there's a lot of people involved. So anytime you want to make a change, and anytime you want to kind of connect the dots, you meet a new person or a new department, and then there again, you need to raise awareness of what all of these topics are. Start from zero. So with every new person that you meet and you interact with, you start from zero. So that is negative in the sense of we don't really have that many resources that we can work with. So that is, it makes it very difficult and emotionally draining as well. So that is, I guess, the negativity of it. But I mean, for the past 1 year that we have seen, I mean, just the conversation going, it's not a lot, but it's something. So there is a positive twist to it. Like, it's just step by step. We, of course, expected to like change it from this academic year to the next. It doesn't work like that. But there's a positive, like, I don't know, like a new outlook towards it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think we're nearly running out of time, but that was brilliant. There are like a few other questions, but unfortunately we kind of have to end it at the moment. But as you can see, SCDAI have their information up on the screen. So if you have any other questions, feel free to send them. I don't know the best way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we agree. Definitely hit us a DM or send us an email, and we'll happily answer all your questions. This was, I guess, an introductory to diversity and inclusion. There's so much more to talk about, and please feel free, as we mentioned in the beginning, take our invitation to use our platforms for yourself to advocate and to raise awareness.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, like, these questions that are unanswered, we can definitely bring to our social media. So that's absolutely possible.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And thank you, both of you guys and SCDAI, for participating in this lecture, because it was definitely something that needed to be, the conversation needed to be started. And for all the students as well who participated, who asked questions, who even just watched the lecture, every little helps, I guess. So hopefully we'll see you next time. And thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.